advocating for the centrality of wellness. And thank you for joining us. Just as people keep coming in, if you could put yourselves on mute, that would be fantastic. As we go through today, we'll be running from about now until for about an hour and a half, with about 20 minutes to go. Hello, I'm Simon Ward, by the way. It's lovely to meet you. If I haven't met you before, my name is Simon Ward, and if I have met you, it still is. Thank you for giving up your time, your hard-earned rest and energy. Welcome to 2025. It's a delight, a thrill, a joy, and an honor for you to have us here. And we are thrilled to be bringing you the next stage in our panel, Actor Education, Advocating for the Centrality of Wellness. I'm coming to you from Sydney, Australia, from the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We have people coming from all around Australia, from New Zealand and from the UK and the US and other places as well. If you have questions during tonight's discussion, what we would ask you to do, please, is to put them into the chat, and then I will gather them together. And then when we get to about 20 minutes before the end, we'll go through the questions and our panel can ask. If you have a question that you would like to ask a particular panelist, could you please put that in the reply to everyone section of the chat, and then perhaps if the panel members can give their permission to share their email addresses or whatever at the end, then we will do that. I'd like to introduce now Dr. Mark Seton, Emeritus Professor of Style at the University of Life, as well as a Professor and Research Associate at the University of Sydney and Excelsior College, a pioneer in the world of actor wellbeing and combining research and practical applications of it. And Mark will be leading us through our discussion today. Over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Simon. Greetings, everyone. So today, as Simon said, we are looking at actor education and indeed advocating for the well-being of not only indeed the students, but also the staff who support the students. And if you consider the professionalisation that has taken place in the training of actors over the last 100 years, it's been very significant that we have introduction of degrees, diplomas, development now of actually acting pedagogy in a more formalized way. So there are all sorts of movements that have been taking place. At the same time, over the last 10 years or so, we've also seen, sadly, some drama schools diminish, indeed evaporate. So there's those challenges, but then there are the more challenging and exciting aspects of training students to become actors. So it's my pleasure to now introduce our panel for this evening, starting with Jennifer Innes from Adelaide, Australia. Jennifer works as a voice and dialect coach in film, television and theatre, while lecturing in voice and dialect at Flinders Drama Centre in Adelaide. And after studying acting and classical theatre at the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art, she worked mainly in theatre in England and then in Adelaide. And upon her move to Victoria, she studied arts management at Melbourne University and then voice and dialect at the VCA and MCM, where she went on to lecture in voice and acting. She's a former board member of the Australian Voice Association and current Australian liaison for the International Voice and Speech Trainers Association. She's keenly engaged with the global voice research and advancements. She is a PhD candidate whose research areas include actor wellbeing, actor pedagogy, and embodied approaches to poetic text. Because Jen believes in empowerment through voice work and is interested in promoting equity, diversity and well-being through her work. Then I'm also like to introduce you to Kylie Bonacorso, based in Sydney, Australia. Kylie has worked as a tutor for actors in training for over 35 years and has extensive experience with specific movement techniques in production. She also works within the business community to provide communication and presentation skills training. She's recently completed working on a cutting-edge communication course called Act Natural by Prologue, which is a project curated within the National Institute of Dramatic Arts here in Sydney. She works as a movement lecturer at Excelsior University College. For the student cohort, Kylie has directed Bus Town by Lachlan Philpott, Love and Information by Carol Churchill, Hearts Like Fists by Adam, oh, I should have got the pronunciation of that word there, Kylie, if you could pronounce it for me. That's all right. We'll come back to that one. And The Government Inspector by Nikolai Gogol. For Red Line Productions at the Old Fitz Theatre, she's directed Smashed by Lally Katz and The Way of Oarfish by Elaine May. And she's also directed The Ghost Sonata, Summer of the Aliens, Lord of the Flies, The House of Bernarda Alba, A Servant of Two Masters, A Comedy of Errors, and Antigone. Wow. Okay. Now over to our dear colleagues, Dunedin, New Zealand. First of all, may I introduce you to Hilary Hauber, who is Associate Professor of Theatre Studies at Otago Whakairu the University of Otago, and a professional actor and director. Hilary studied acting and the teaching of acting at the Neighbourhood Playhouse School of Theatre in New York City. She has performed in major professional theatres throughout New Zealand, as well as in Europe and the USA. Hilary's research interests include documentary and verbatim theatre, the theorisation of acting and actor training, and the theatre of Aotearoa, New Zealand. For several years, Hilary has collaborated with Dr. Glenda Wallace, who I'll be introducing shortly, to help student actors appreciate the cognitive processes behind their craft, while also guiding them to navigate ethical considerations that undergird acting. And her edited book, Acting in Aotearoa, co-authored with David O'Donnell, has recently been published by Routledge. And I'll just hand over to Hilary to have an acknowledgement of welcome from New Zealand.
Kia ora, Mark. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa I Aotearoa. Greetings, 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 thrice greetings to you from Aotearoa. Ki te hui tēnei I tēnei pō, tēnā koe, kei te mihi, kei te mihi, kei te mihi to this gathering this evening. I greet you. I greet you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Hilary. And now I introduce Glenda. Glenda is a UK-trained clinical psychologist specialising in neurology and trauma. She's been involved in theatre and the arts for many years, acting, singing, writing, enabling and supporting her children into theatre and their respective arts careers, and teaching on the Otago University Theatre Studies program. Aldous Huxley believed art and science could intersect through creativity, and this is Glenda's underlying philosophy in her work life and the understanding of these often perceived binary sciences. This approach enables her to walk in both worlds while creating new and exciting paths. So for all of you who are gathered here as participants in tonight's webinar, I think you'd agree we've got quite a stellar cast for exploring this. So just as we explore all this, just before we go into our exploration on the focus on actor training, I was wondering if I could ask each of you to share briefly what you're currently doing in that acting training and actor wellbeing space. And perhaps if I could start with Jennifer, and then I'll kind of bring each person in after that.
Yes. Am I unmuted? Yes. Hi. Thanks, Mark. Currently, first of all, I just want to acknowledge that I am living, working, mothering, creating, teaching, playing on Kaurna land. Yes, beautiful Kaurna land. So currently I am teaching at Flinders University. I'm actually coming to this webinar. I keep looking to the side because I've got my panelists here and I just want to feel like I'm talking to people. I'm going to move you up here. I am currently a casual actually at Flinders University, and I have been a member of faculty at a couple of other institutions. And so I find myself in a position to talk about the pressures that we will talk about of working within the university sector from a slightly distanced perspective. I also teach, currently I'm coaching on a play, dialect coaching on a play and a film, and wrapping up post-production for another film and doing a PhD. So I think that there's people that, you know, wellbeing comes into all of those things. I'm working with professional actors and student actors, but my main focus, I guess, for research, and I think the place that a lot of work could and should be done, as do you all, is in that teaching studio.
Right. Thanks, Jennifer. Perhaps we go to Hilary, and then I'll go to Kylie.
Kia ora, thank you, Mark. As Mark said in his introduction, I teach in a university context, so I teach at Otaku Whakaihuaka, the University of Otago in Otepoti, Dunedin, here in the south of Aotearoa. I teach in a number of courses, but the one I suppose that's most opposite to this evening's kōrero, this evening's conversation, is a course taken by second-year students that focuses on actor training in as applied a way as possible, as I'm permitted to teach it in a university context. As Mark said in his introduction, I'm studied at the Neighbourhood Playhouse, so I'm a Meisner-trained actor, but I've also studied with Sharon Marie Carnegie, most particularly latest Stanislavskian work on active analysis. So the focus of the course is kind of Stanislavskian, but it's Stanislavskian with my own bent applied to it. I think that's probably enough for now. Would that be right, Mark?
Yeah, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of it. Yeah, thanks, Kylie.
Hello, everybody. I'd just like to say thank you for having me, and I'm really amazed to be in such esteemed company with everyone, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from everyone tonight. What do? I am a theatre practitioner. I am pretty much in tracky pants on the floor. That's where I spend a lot of my life. And I have done working across, working my way through different age groups across the years. And I found myself for the last nearly 20 years working at Excelsior College, also as similarly to Jen, as a casual, working in a tertiary system, working with actors from first to third year in their degree. And so the work that I end up doing with those students is very movement practice. So I teach across a number of other things, but that's one of my my loves and my passions, to work with students from anything from looking at, you know, their body awareness to some big hefty theatre forms that, you know, look at acting practice through a more physical lens. So I do a lot of that. I work at the National Institute of Dramatic Art, which we call over here NIDA, and I have been doing that for scarily, I think, close to 30 years, working with various age groups, not in their full-time program, but they have a number of studio programs, and they also have a corporate program, so transfer of acting skills into the business sector, which has its own, if we're calling those people students as well, that has a different kind of sense of well-being, working with a corporate lens as well. And so similarly, I find myself in a position, especially with my long-term students, recognizing the necessity to create a space for them when they come in with me on a very domestic level, to create a safe space, and finding as many ways as I possibly can to create a space for well-being. And I guess on a hopefully more national or global level, having been involved as a learning design specialist on the project that Mark mentioned before, which is a communication course called Act Natural. So it's part workbook and journal, part app. And it's just creating a huge sense of awareness of who we are as people and how we connect. And for me, that's got a lot to do with well-being, in the sense of, if I know myself and I know what other people are doing, then my connections will have more value and I can look after those connections. So I'm hoping that has lots of legs and can affect people in a greater way, in a bigger picture. So that's bits and pieces of me. Thank you.
Thank you. That's lovely, Kylie. And Glenda.
Oh, kia ora. Well, I work full-time in therapy, working as a neuropsychologist and trauma therapist. And then I work with Hilary on the acting paper. One of the things that we've found has been really beneficial is that at the end of the workshop is I stay around and I'm there for any of the students to talk to privately. The longest I've been around is 4 hours afterwards, have a line of them. And I've actually been able to pick some of them up as clients and facilitated them getting into the right services. So we feel that that's really important. And Hilary and I work really closely on looking at those sensibilities prior and post the acting paper.
Great. Thank you, Glenda. So I'm going to be asking you in a moment if you'd like to share where you particularly might see that you need to attend to various sensitivities, where you might identify certain people within your training programs are either marginalized or ignored, or you perhaps feel under-resourced. And particularly if there are any particular models of actor training that you draw upon or you see need attention in this day and age where we're recognizing important things like neurodiversity. But just before I open up that question for each of you, I'd just like to acknowledge what we have here tonight really kind of touches all the bases that we experience in actor training. So we've got the movement, we've got the body in that somatic in the movement sense, but also somatic in the vocal sense. And then that storytelling aspect, those story acting aspects. But we also have that kind of, and this goes across all of them, student care and well-being, and potentially also teacher care and well-being. So when Glenda makes mention of therapeutic support for the students, potentially, or maybe it's missing for the staff. These are the areas that we're exploring this evening. So that's in your context. So if anyone like to make an offer, if you could raise a hand, then we'll know to go to you next. If you'd like to speak perhaps to some of those sensitivities about marginalization or ignoring particular issues or under-resourcing things in a particular way. Who'd like to? Yes, Glenda, thank you.
One of the things I'm very aware of is the neurological and biological development of each of us. And a lot of the students are under 25, which means their frontal lobes haven't finished developing, which I think is really important for them to understand. And what we want is them to use their time at university, exploring who they are, finding their tribe in a safe way, so that they can find the edges of what they're doing, bringing in their history with them and experiencing all of those experiences to help develop their personality. I'm not Italian, by the way, but I use my hands an awful lot, so apologies. If there's anybody that's got visual problems, just let me know and I'll sit on my hands. So many of the students that we have at best have fluctuating mental health presentations to those with trauma backgrounds, and they come with a diagnosis of mental health. So we need to be considering who's presented in front of us, and actually also who's come to do this training. Is it because it's seen as an easy paper, or is it because somebody's passionate about being an actor? And there's a there's a balance there all the time. We found that some students in the past who were following the method approach were left quite vulnerable when they're involved in a professional play, and they couldn't find their path back. And that really concerned
both Hilary and I, we weren't working together at that point. So what I try to do is consider the range of life experiences, their neurodiversity, their mental health, their experience of being taught, and how that comes across. And my main frame is safety. So I start by teaching everybody the basics of the autonomic nervous system, how memories are laid down, the impact of and where trauma, big T and small t trauma, lands in the body. And then trying to get them to enable them to find their own edges. Who am I? What are my intentions? What am I trying to express? How do I get in and out? And we do that through drawing and metaphor, because that seems to be the most successful format for most of them. And it's really interesting. They might be a bit neurodiverse and a bit like this, but they're hyper-focused. And the questions they ask tell us that it lands, that this is information that they've not had before. They don't understand that what we're doing is saying, we're building you up from the bottom. We're teaching you who you are so that you can learn your thoughts, feelings, and body reactions in terms of internal and external. So that's the basis of what I'm doing in the teaching.
Fantastic. Thank you, Linda. Jennifer, yes. And then Hilary.
Yeah, Glenda. We all need a Glenda. we borrow you. So we're gonna. I know we're gonna talk about like what's under-resourced, but no, literally, we all need a Glenda. But you talked about the experience of being taught, and I wanted to jump into that because, and I'm going to offer a little bit of my background before I became a voice coach. So I trained as an actor, and I was in London. I was 21. I had pretty poor, what I now know as pretty poor self-esteem, and I had some need for validation, and I had all of these things that now I can reflect on and say, well, poor girl. But at the time, I was kicking on through, and I was coping in the way that actors and acting students often cope. You know, that the research shows us that not only is the prefrontal cortex not fully developed at this age, but that the act of going to university often has these huge changes. You know, you're often moving to another city. I was in another country. You're away from your family. You're trying to fit into a new cohort, and we know actor training programs, they're very intense socially, aren't they? You know, I hate seeing when first years hook up and get together, because you just go, you've got 3 more years together, what are you doing? So it's very intense. Anyway, so I remember distinctly how my mental chatter and my my inability to be present, that came up in our pre-webinar chat, got in the way of my learning. I really regret that I wasn't able to take in the value of what a lot of those teachers were offering me. I think there were flaws in how they set up that culture at that drama school in terms of holding the students. But ever since then, and as I came away from that and stopped blaming myself for being a failure, I looked at that and thought, well, that was difficult. So what I experienced in the classroom was really, you know, as I say, I can see now I was comparing myself to other students. So there was the competitiveness, there was the need for validation, there was the preoccupation with who's the favorite of the teacher. And I got to tell you, back then, 20 years ago in London, it was pretty obvious who the favorites were and who weren't, you know, worth the trouble. So one thing I do in my studio is, I do happen to see the best in my students, but even if I didn't, you know, it's a matter of being task-based and not ever bringing personal relationships into it, and allowing the students the freedom of not navigating any complex external, going and having a drink with them in the pub, etc. We don't want to complicate things. We want to give them a safe learning environment. But actually what I came here to say, and then I diverted a little bit, is that something I find useful is being really open with the student. So often it will come about organically that one of them will say in a check-in, I just feel like I'm not as good as everybody else. Right. So first of all, you have to set the environment up, and that's a whole nother thing. But if you've got the environment and somebody feels safe enough to say that, then let's talk about that. And what I find really freeing for the students, and they breathe a collective sigh of relief, is when I say, yeah, you're not alone in those feelings, and there's actually research on it. It is very real. I experienced it, and then 70% of their peers will say more than that. I'm experiencing it too. You know, it's talking to them, it's reassuring them that it's real, because even though these are invisible, intangible things, they do slow down productivity, as well as the ethical, you know, requirements for us to care and hold these young developing adults. We can teach more efficiently if people can be not inward looking, and you know, but Barbara Houseman, who's a voice coach in the UK, talks about turning the cameras out. And so we will do these really visceral, imaginative exercises early on, when we talk about what does it feel like to have the cameras in, to be under scrutiny, and you see them shrink and their breath gets small, and then they turn the cameras out. So we share language from the very beginning. You know, Patsy Rodenberg's Second Circle, I'm sure some of you have come across it. So having the language, having it an open dialogue about these things that in the past perhaps have been sort of, oh, well, you know, pull your socks up, you know, buckle down, you're an adult, get on with it, you know, school of hard knocks. Aside from not being kind, it's not efficient. People slow themselves down.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jennifer. Hilary, and then Kylie.
Jennifer, you said we all need a Glenda. I'm very blessed to have a Glenda. And these things might not kind of all add up at the moment. I just wanted to say the very first thing that I wanted to say was, when I went to acting school, they asked you to have a chest X-ray before you went into acting school, presumably to make sure that you didn't have an undiagnosed heart condition or breathing condition that was going to see you have, you know, some sort of episode in a movement class. But it just seems to me that that was the only thing that concerned people 30 years ago, that you know, or 40 years ago, that you know, that your actual heart muscle rather than your metaphoric heart was in good order. And just kind of picking up on what you were saying before, Jennifer, Toi Whakaari New Zealand Drama School's got a really interesting curriculum that starts with the question "Ko wai o," which translates as "Who am I?" And so, you know, even though one is always going in that direction, one's going in that direction from a place of understanding who one is oneself. And I just wanted to say one or two little things about what Glenda and I do, because it might seem a little bit slightly confusing as we're sort of here as a team in a way. A long time ago, I read an article written, I think, in 2010 by a man called Eberhard Scheiferle, and he talked about acting being an altered state of consciousness. He said that this is what often draws young people to acting, is that kind of feeling of heightened awareness, what Makai Csikszentmihalyi might call flow state, perhaps. And it just seemed to me that young students are wanting to kind of lean into some kind of heightened state, and it seemed so super important that they understood what undergirded all of that, how their cognitive functioning works, and from somebody who is able to kind of also understand these things from a theatrical perspective. So that's how I started working with Glenda on this short module that we do together. And a lot of our students come to us having been deeply attracted somewhere to a method approach, and having experienced encouragement and praise in this area. And we discourage such an approach because we see it as being grueling for a student's mental health, and we don't really have the capacity or wish to teach a method approach, because we don't think that it's very healthy for them to have such a deep identification with the trauma of another. So I guess we encourage compassion, Glenda? Perhaps rather than emotion, memory, and over-identification with trauma of another.
Can I just add something, Mark? One of the first things we do is we get them to internally, cameras in, scan from the top of their head to the tip of the toe, and just notice what's going on in their body, any areas of distress, tension, anything. And then I teach them all something called a butterfly hug. And they all do this, and I slow my speech down, And what this does after 20 seconds is oxytocins get produced, and then their breathing changes from up here to down here, and it's self-soothing and new neuron pathways develop. And so then we say, okay, now scan and notice the difference in you. And you can just see some of them are like, ooh. So when I do this, they're then encouraged to use that, all of them, openly at any point that something might activate them. And it's such a beautiful way to start, you know, to just recognize that and it being a community. Yeah.
Lovely. Thanks, Glenda. Kylie.
Hearing so many things that make sense to me and from everyone else. So it's pretty much sharing a very similar experience in just slightly different ways. I would like to say that where I primarily work with my students over a long period of time, which is Excelsior College, we are lucky enough to have a department of Glenda, which well, probably not quite Glenda. We have a degree in counselling, so it's really a great opportunity if things become outside my circumference of being able to support them. I do have a referral space within the university to be able to assist them. Some of the things that I teach in movement are usually those very, very big gun man names that come up, like Lecoq and Laban. I'm with Suzuki, if you're familiar with some of those techniques. And similarly to some of your experiences, the training that I received was very brutal in so many ways. So it was literally, nobody's going to watch you cry, get up, go and do it. And I remember, is anyone familiar with the Suzuki method, the Japanese? Yeah, so it's very, very hardcore on the body. It is an acting methodology and vocal training, but it is through the physical rigor that you get the result. And I remember when I was training, we would soak our feet in ice water to numb them before we used to start. It was that hardcore, slamming your feet into, I mean, I'm surprised I'm not in a wheelchair with my hips by now. So over the years, having to unwind in myself that boot camp style of training, because whilst I was okay with it with myself, just noticing that passing that on to students, you know, my job is not to break them, it's to, you know, make them into something, you know, more than what they are in terms of skill sets when they leave. So it's, you know, through my years of practice, watching students come in through the door and hearing myself say things that my teachers said to me, like leave your baggage at the door and all of that kind of language. And now, you know, in the last quite a long while, shifting away from that, because whilst I need them to come into the classroom and I need them to be available, not only for themselves to learn, but because it's a shared experience, they are working with an ensemble, their physical presence affects the learning of other people. But there has to be, yeah, come in, be ready, but there just has to be that caveat of saying, but if there are struggles going on that are going to stop you from getting through, and if I can unpick that in a time that gets you at least where we need to get you today, then talk to me. And so I think this brings up a lot of other things for us as a teacher, that we're not just managing the training of actors anymore, we're managing that time given to get people sometimes into the classroom, to stay in the classroom, and to go and do their assessment work with groups and things like that. So that's a huge learning for me as they're coming into that space. So if I am teaching Suzuki, it becomes more of an exercise of mindfulness, of asking yourself to do a body check-in, asking yourself the questions before you ask me, what can I solve myself? And then stopping and talking about things so that we keep peeling back, you know, all the things that we're thinking. So, I mean, I heard you say it before, Jen, that that check-in phase is so important for me in terms of well-being pastoral care, professional development, whatever you want to call it, it is my go-to as soon as my students are in the class. It is literally, actually, it happens before they get into the class. I observe what they're like talking to each other or hanging out, you know, where they hang out, Mark. So,
Yeah.
you know, you can actually pick up very quickly with some great ob skills. That person doesn't look like their normal self today. I'm going to flag this for when we get into class. And sure enough, something's happened. And so doing that check-in within the group. And sometimes I've just gone, how are we today? And someone cries and runs away. So, you know, sometimes it's you need that to happen so that you can get on with the work, so that they're available for the work. So I guess putting in a whole bunch of ways of working after that. I mean, whether you hark back to the, you know, the old school, which I still love, you know, whether it's Gardner's theory of intelligences, that everyone works and learns in a different way, but finding as many different ways to access the work as possible. You know, whether it's talking, showing video, conversation, demonstration, coaching, pre-assessment discussions. So as many ways that you're going to capture everybody's ability to learn something, rather than the way that I was taught, which was get in, do it properly, or else you're out, sort of thing. So finding access points. So whether I've got someone who is autistic in my class and I know that they require a lot more repetition and writing, just finding what works for each student. So it kind of makes us jugglers, really, that we have to find multiple ways of teaching the same thing to a cohort that has to eventually converge to do the one thing in an assessment, but how they get there is going to be quite different. And I was just going to make a point, just to finish off this thought, that some of the things that I teach, I specialize in commedia dell'arte. I love that. I trained in Europe to do it, and I'm very, very passionate about that. And it is a very Italian thing to do. So one of the things that I love about practicing something that on paper looks like it's inaccessible to a lot of people, one of the great pleasures I have with working with that style in class is how we can undo that to work with any type of neurodivergence, gender, age, even if you've got people from different nationalities. Recently I've had someone who is from Indonesia, and just going, you can create a character that uses your language and uses some of your cultural sensibilities, because the characters have malleability to be able to be culturally inclusive in today's version of it. So finding, I guess, ways to use some of those big original theatre forms and shift it for today's training.
Great. Thanks, Kai. Thanks all for your great insights and experiences there, which pick up on many themes I'm sure we could talk at length about. What I'll do is I'm going to bring our next question into the picture, and I may pick up on some of the things you've said as we look at that. Because I'm looking particularly at what each of your experiences might be with actually, should we or do we need to more formally, at a kind of higher education level, more formally introduce practices that enhance and support well-being of the students, both in the work and in the college environment as they seek to do the work? Or is it an alternative that just because all four of you come across to me, and I know many of, or three at least of you, you're all caring, open-hearted educators, and so I can sense you are already bringing in practices of encouraging and enhancing well-being in the students' lives. A question that does often, well, I have witnessed, is sometimes there's a claim that we really can't fit a well-being unit in the current curriculum. That maybe it's better if we just try and meld it in amongst all the other bits of the curriculum. Would any of you have some thoughts, experience, or other around how does well-being get introduced? Does it need to be a separate item, or is it how each of you have done it? Jennifer, did you have? Yeah, go.
Yes, thank you. I can talk to my experience of what I think is how I think it is happening at the moment. It does, and the research that I have done, which was interviewing some trainers and some third-year students at a couple of key institutions in Australia. Research. I interviewed the students as well, because I think that their perspective is, you know, not about the hierarchy of credibility, but that the students actually have language and learning and needs that we don't necessarily know about as being an older generation. Anyway, I see, as you said, Mark, I see a lot of trainers who are very passionate about well-being, and I see a lot of strategies being implemented in classrooms. What I heard from students was that was not consistent. And so I do think, you know, there was an institution that was part of my study that did have a wellbeing unit, and that was really, really useful, well received. It gave everybody a shared language, and it prioritized well-being. I mean, it centered the student and said, you're important. But it also started to provide skills that are going to help them in their profession. We can't pretend that, excuse me, we can't pretend that being an actor isn't knitted in with mental health challenges, lifestyle challenges. Your amazing study, Mark, you know, excuse me, we can't deny that. That is tied into being an artist. So this is not mollycoddling. This is not, it's actually part of being an actor. And I was listening back to the podcast, another podcast in this series, talking about the dojo, that wonderful, talking about training to do acting or training to be an actor. So I think that there should be a unit. I understand that the lack of time argument, but I think the argument should be made that it actually is again in the benefit to the benefit of efficacy. So everybody will work harder, better, and longer. I think just very quickly before we move on to, because I can't wait to hear everybody else's answer, I think a big challenge can be that, and I'm sure you will have experienced this, that there's a lot of sessionals who come in, a lot of visiting artists come into drama schools, and the talent that comes in is wonderful, and the creativity comes in that comes in is wonderful, but it really contributes to that lack of consistency in the classroom. And which is not to say people can't have their own teaching styles, but there has, you know, it's been suggested there's a lack of pedagogy, where there might be a lot of creativity that maybe there's less pedagogy. And I think it's important to find the balance. And I think I would love to see all visiting teachers inducted. I would just like to see more conversation amongst all staff about that. This is the code, these are the there are certainly codes of conduct, etc. There's policies, but this is the culture in this drama school. This is important. This is why it's important. I think you're always going to have people with personal opinions who maybe came from an older generation of teaching and think, oh, well, you know, get on with the show. I don't know what we can do about that, but there needs to be more consultation, conversation, and yes, all of the things. Bring it into the classroom, but formalize it. That's my take on it.
Thank you. Hilary, I saw your hand.
Yeah, I just think I absolutely agree with what you're saying, Jennifer. I think that it's too much, particularly in a westernized institution. We see hauora, health, mental health, physical, as a kind of nice to have. Well-being is a nice to have. And I think that's a very kind of, you know, Glenda and I were talking about a kind of, you know, pyramid-like westernized structure of institutions the other day when we had our conversation. And I think this speaks to that as well, that, you know, oh, well-being's nice to have, you know, deal with your well-being in your own time. But I don't think that is appropriate. I think that well-being should be front and center and knitted into everything that we do. And I think the idea of a code of conduct and the idea of induction for teachers is super, super important, so that we're all speaking the same language. We're all understanding the same kaupapa, the same undergirding principles. So not a nice to have, important to have. That's all I wanted to say.
Essential to have. Yeah. Kylie, you're next, and then Glenda.
Oh, yes and yes, to both of you. I would love to see it implemented, especially in the uni I've been at for the longest period. I think it's a 101 for the first year. It sets them up, just like as you get towards the end, you want to set them up for how they, audition and how they enter into the industry. Entering into training is also part of the process, because a lot of them, and I don't know if you found this as well, but we often get a lot of cohort straight out of school, and they have HSC or high school behaviours that come in little gangs and masses, and they have behaviours they've learnt at their various schools, and a lot of it is not great. And so we often spend our first part of the year, if not the whole year, trying to unwind some of the high school or schooling learnt behaviours before we can actually get into creating the work and creating an ensemble. So any way we can unpack that earlier in the year, or at the very beginning, really, and not to say that it shouldn't be something that travels with them throughout a degree, but that would be great. It would save me a lot of time and a lot of effort. And also, I guess it then asks the question, and I know this becomes more of an administrative and financial question, but the scrutiny through audition phases, because sometimes we are getting students in who, in terms of their own personal well-being, probably shouldn't be in a course that's about to unpack their emotional spaces, and it can be a very unsafe space for a lot of students, or there's a lot of time spent away from the actual training to get some of these people through. And so they're not ready yet to do this because they haven't spent time working on themselves. And so when we're taking them straight in, you need numbers. It's a tough one, because I understand it needs to be financial, but sometimes that cohort can be quite in strife, because there's so many wellbeing issues in the one class. It starts to become a whole therapy thing, and that can be a struggle as well. So perhaps something from the audition space, maybe the way we set it up, that it's not just about auditioning for skill and ensemble playing a game together. Is there ways that we can find out how people are they ready, basically? Are they ready to do this?
Right. Thank you, Kylie. Glenda.
I agree with everything that's been said, and I think it's great. One of the perspectives I got is I do a lot of therapy with professional actors across the world. I do a lot on Zoom, and lots of them come to New Zealand, the South Island, for R&R, and I see them. The damage that has been done by the institutions, by the directors and people, in the professional world, that some of them who are at the end of their acting career because they're females and they're considered too old when they get to a certain age, they are still dealing with really early trauma that absolutely stripped them down. And by somebody saying, your legs aren't big enough, or you haven't got big enough breasts, or your breasts are too big. I mean, this is the sort of language that people have grown up with. And unfortunately, no policy in any university or any institution is going to make sure that everybody treats students with respect. They don't treat themselves with respect. So how are we going to expect that? And so I think that there's a big overhaul that needs to be done. And where do you start? It's the horse or the cart, really.
Thank you, Glenda. Yes, sorry, Kylie, go ahead.
I was just going to add to that, because that was really interesting in terms of, other people coming in. I think you mentioned it as well, Jen, other people coming in from outside, external directors working, and obviously people coming in with trauma as it is. I know that a lot of our shows, we've started introducing intimacy coordinators so that we can start navigating that space. I don't think it's a policy as such, but I certainly think it's the start of something that is considering physical contact and dynamics between people in aggression or intimacy. So I think it's a start, but I would love to see that as a policy as well within our uni.
Great. Yes, Hilary.
Yeah, and I think just same as happening in New Zealand with intimacy coordinators in the industry, Kylie, which I think is just amazing, really, really, really important. But again, we have to have the kind of correct training for those roles, and again, a very, very rigorous undergirding principles that for those people, because that is a position of such enormous trust. And I've written it down, a couple of words here. One is trust, I just said it, and the other one is resilience. And I think that that process that you're talking about, where before the actor even enters a program, that we don't see, we have to see if they're going to be resilient enough and really why they want to do such a thing. So it's just a few thoughts.
I'm loving what's coming through here. For me, what stands out as you're sharing these things is particularly many of you refer to the work. I think it's a lovely way that we describe what it is we're taking students into. I'm very conscious that in other academic disciplines, the focus often isn't really about the work. It's like about ideas. It's often accumulating knowledge, set practices, that sort of thing. But I think there's a recognition in the creative arts and the performing arts, particularly at the end of the day, we're preparing a bunch of bodies and hearts and minds and souls to do the work. And that's quite transformative of these young human beings, which I think is often not really understood and appreciated by the administration of universities. I think they see it more as a burden rather than an exciting blessing that we're nurturing, fostering creative human beings who can do the work and then therefore make that contribution to society. But I think also, I wonder how much care there is for the teaching staff who themselves are open-hearted. It's a phrase I like to use when I'm thinking about vulnerability, that open-heartedness. And how do you feel as staff? Do you feel you're getting support from the academy in order to in turn support your students? I'd be interested in any responses to that, if you feel comfortable to say that without naming systems. Yes, Kylie.
Okay, unmute. Okay, no naming names.
No.
I find teaching, it's probably a strange thing to say, but you'll know what I mean. I find it quite a solitary experience, even though you're surrounded by people, or even directing. You are basically, the captain of your ship, and you have to guide people through. And so oftentimes you are left alone to yourself to manage. And sometimes if there's not people available to have that support, you can be often alone managing quite big emotional lives in the space. And I guess one of the things that I would love to see happening is like well-being checks for staff, because I know I do it myself I've noticed this about this student and this is how I'm managing it. How are you finding it? And then it's really interesting that you discover I've had this issue. I thought I was alone in that. And it would be really great to have a conversation about each student as they're starting in on a year, and just to unpack what we've noticed, because people behave in different ways. I know with movement, some people are very vulnerable or feel awkward, and so when we're playing around with body dynamics, it opens up a lot of spaces that make people feel uncomfortable, but you might not get that in acting technique when I'm doing an A-B scene. So sometimes I might see things that other people don't. So having those conversations with staff, and I know once again it might lie in the financial space, where having those conversations with all of the tutors to do check-ins to see how we're coping, and if someone else might have another technique that's working with that student. And unless we seek it ourselves, we're operating rather in isolation. So I would love maybe more of maybe that set up. So there's even if there's some sort of space on a SharePoint or something where we can do that check-in. I don't know, something would be good.
Yeah, great. Yeah, Hilary.
Oh, it just occurs to me that I should unmute myself. It just occurs to me that we're being asked to do many, many things as teachers. And yeah, and I don't know if you remember this, but I remember kind of you get very attached to your acting teacher. You get very attached to your acting teacher in a way that you don't get attached to your French teacher or your history teacher or your phys ed teacher. And so, you know, unlike my colleagues who are revered colleagues who teach history or other things, students don't tend to come to them with pastoral care issues, mental health issues and wellbeing issues in the same way that they come to somebody whom they see as having seen them, and I think this about my own acting teachers. Goodness gracious me, I still think about Richard Pinter at the Neighbourhood Playhouse and go, that dude saw into my soul, I thought at the time and still think now. Poor old Richard Pinter probably didn't at all see it, but anyway. But the students perceive that you see them, and so they go to you with and understandably with all sorts of issues, and you go, well, there's all sorts of services around the university that you can go to. There is disability services, there is what we call student learning development for students who are having problems with dyslexia and other things like that, and so many different places, mental health services, but they go, I don't want to go to them, I want to go to you. So that puts a lot on people who are in our position, I think, whether they be at a university or at a drama school, and I just don't think there is a kind of appreciation of that.
Thanks, Hilary. Jennifer, yes, thank you. You want to take on this?
Yes, absolutely. It's especially being, open-hearted people, as we tend to be in the arts, often, and the students also tend to be quite open-hearted, inward-looking, highly sensitive people. There is that extra level of relationship that can form, which is also why it's important, of course, that we have boundaries, which can be really challenging when somebody needs something from you and you habitually give. That's just to add on to what you were saying, Hilary. In terms of being supported, I think my observation from being a casual at the moment is I currently am, which is great because I can say that and I'm not offending my current workplace. And I think that's almost a fluke or luck, because there's the permanent staff who are there are very caring people, and one person in particular who I have a lot of contact with and is very interested in actor wellbeing and staff wellbeing and very approachable and always offers a check-in with me, and I feel extremely supported. But I feel like that might be luck. In the past, as casual at another different institution, I have felt very, very on the outside. I had no idea what was going on. I wasn't invited in any meetings. That was quite a long time ago. But I think the people that possibly are, aside from the work and the relationships and that sort of that heavy load that we carry on our shoulders, I think if you're a good teacher, it's exhausting, frankly. If you're a mediocre teacher, you can probably get away with it without kind of burning yourself out so much. But I hope that doesn't sound like I'm being egotistical. What I mean by good is attentive, and I'm directing that towards my colleagues here. But it's the permanent staff that I'm worried about, because that person I mentioned who's really supportive towards me, and that I don't know. I mean, I get an idea of the workload that those people are under, and I've been under that work myself. In another place that I worked, I had to leave once I had a child because I thought I can't manage a child as a solo mother. I can't manage a child and manage the management. Like, I can't have that the frustration of, you know, it's been said before, the budget cuts, well, can't you just teach that unit? You know, imagine Kylie, like, you know, or can't you just teach comedia? To me, I'm a voice teacher, but not realize, the manager not realizing the specialized skills and not valuing them. So I think institutionally, I'd be interested in the support those people who are spending all of their time rewriting, you know, the syllabus and dealing with, you know, academic documentation, and then going, oh, I've got a class, oh God, now I've got to switch my energy entirely, and that somehow that becomes secondary. And, you know, imagine being able to feel prepared and go and play in a studio before your lesson. Like, imagine that. But, you know, so I feel for those people. So I'd love to hear from the people who are currently in that, more of that position.
Okay. Oh, yes, Hilary.
Just to say, I was in that position. I've chosen to go down to 3 days a week this year, from this year onwards, because doing that just burnt me out. Writing, you know, curriculum documents and fighting for the non-abolition of the program, and then, you know, going off and teaching an improvisation class. It not only challenged both sides of my brain, metaphorically speaking, but it was just an unsustainable thing. So I took matters into my own hands.
Yes, a bit of agency for ourselves. That's really good thing. Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely important.
So it's just we're approaching nearly the last half hour. In about 10 minutes or so, we're going to move over to Simon to take us through some questions you who are participating tonight may like to drop in the chat. If it's to a particular person, feel free to do that. I've got 2 more questions in mind, so I'm going to ask one of you all, and then that probably will take us to about 10 past the hour and hand over to Simon. And then I'll have a closing kind of a 1-sentence response question as well. But I'm just wondering if there are any aspects of this actor training space that you feel aren't being noticed, either in practice, people aren't talking about the challenge of doing this in the actor training space, or if you read any of the scholarly research that's being done around actor wellbeing, are there questions that you don't think have been asked or should be being asked? This is a trickier one. I think we're kind of now looking ahead. What do we perhaps feel is underexplored and might need more examination? Yes, Kylie.
I'm not 100% sure if I'm on the right track with this, Mark, so you can steer me back if that's the case. Just because of the pressures that the universities, and big and small, because I work across a lot of the smaller acting schools in Sydney, as well as some of the, you know, some of the bigger ones. So just finding that as everyone scrambles to try and accommodate financially everything that they've got to accommodate, I find with a lot of the courses, the squeeze on the actual skills is getting smaller and smaller. Maybe for institutions like NIDA, they can really hold on to the longevity of some of their courses. But I know under fire is always movement and voice. They are the pillars of what we do. And yet they're the ones, often movement is one of the first ones to be chipped away to go. And I guess what I find is across all of these spaces is the consultation between the people making the decisions and the people actually on the floor trying to manage the decision, or the aftermath of the decision. So whether it's cut hours and suddenly I've still got to get through, there's a lot of characters in Commedia, you just can't get through it. You know, when things get cut, then what happens is my students have less time on the floor, and if I'm dealing with other things with them, I just find there's a massive squeeze in terms of how am I actually supposed to train you. There's almost, I'm doing it on the smell of an oily rag, and I've got to do everything, and I just find it becomes sometimes prohibitive to how I manage teaching what I do. And I'm always finding that I'm making decisions to try and do the best thing for my class, and knowing that I'm doing this royal dance behind the scenes to manage. And so I guess it comes back to a more robust consultation process. And I feel like oftentimes the people on the floor, the people who are the front facing in front of the students day in, day out, the ones that have these relationships with these prized students that we want to keep in these venues, they're the last people that get spoken to. And I guess that, you know, if there's some sort of way that looking after everybody on every rung, so that we can get that consultation process, so that it then means that in the classroom we can not only deliver the training, but feel like we're supporting our students as well. And just as an example of that, I mean, for example, historically in one venue teaching twice a week, which is at least enough to touch base with my students. You know, a lot happens in a week in the life of a 21-year-old. And so the more often I can check in, I know that I can keep them on track to where they're supposed to be. If things get cut, I'm back to one day, and when I say a day, one, you know, shorter workshop. 7 days is even longer in the adventurous lives of my guys. And I find that I spend a lot of time unwinding some of the stuff that's happened during the week to get them back to where I need to go. And so there are well-being consequences with the decisions being made outside my sphere of ability to change. So I feel sometimes I'm just flapping around in the ocean trying to manage everybody else's decisions, and sometimes that can be frustrating, and it just means I'm always the one trying to make something happen in my class. So yeah, I just think that's an interesting thing.
That's absolutely, Kylie.
Yeah.
No, look, you know, we need people to name this lived experience, I think.
Yeah, because I love teaching and I love my students, and that's why I do what I do.
Exactly.
But it becomes sometimes you're concentrating more on everything else except the thing you want to do. And you're reeling from the decisions that are made without any consultation, and then you have to keep reforming. And I'd like to think I'm a very flexible person. I think I am, but there's only a certain amount of flexibility before people start
something breaks.
snapping.
Something breaks.
I'm not snapping rage, or but just like you burnt out, as you were saying, Hillary, you get burnt out or whatever. So, or feel unappreciated.
Right. Thanks, Kylie. Appreciate your openness about that. Hillary, yes, thank you. That tentative hand.
I don't know whether I'm maybe making a completely mad suggestion. It just seems that this is another, and I totally agree with what you're saying, Kylie. I couldn't agree more. We're trying to shoehorn something into this kind of Western paradigm, and where time becomes our terrible enemy. You know, Hillary, I've got to walk, 10 minutes that way to my history class. Can I please leave 5 minutes early? Because 5 minutes isn't enough time to let me get there. And there's just, the shoehorning of work that sometimes just needs to seep more widely out to the edges is being shoehorned into this kind of Western paradigm of learning, this modularized kind of units of learning. And I hear you saying this, Kylie. We used to, before budget cuts, we used to take our students on a wānanga, which is like a traditional learning experience, on a marae, which is a traditional Māori learning space. And they would stay there for a day and overnight and part of the next day. And the learning just kind of flowed for how much time was needed for it. And I don't know, that sort of life world paradigm seemed to me a much more useful way of attending to actor well-being, as well as attending to the, I guess the subject matter that we're teaching them, as well as the way that we're teaching them. And, we went, oh, well, now it's 10:30 at night, we all have to go to bed. And we just did what was done. I don't know. I was talking to Miranda Harcourt, who's an acting teacher, and she said, when we're at acting school with like 20 other, 21-year-olds. And then when we get out into the industry, we work with, 40-year-old man, a 95-year-old woman, and a dog. And you know, it isn't the same thing as working with 20 other 20-year-olds. Anyway, my brain just went on a very, very circuitous journey then, Mark.
I enjoyed the journey with you. Thank you. Glenda.
Yeah, I'd like to just build on what Hilary was saying. The corridor that Hilary and I had the other evening, we were looking at how we can move from silos functioning, very Western, to the Maori idea of collective and community. And we were thinking about some of the students that have got specific disabilities. And we have an excellent lecturer in geography who's won an international award for teaching students with disabilities. So as a neuropsychologist, we use him to help students get back into study. They don't pay and do a paper. So we were talking about how can we do that within the institution to have this community, this shared experience. Or I might be teaching history and geography and theatre, but there is some acknowledgement of we're doing the same. We're all fighting the battle of cuts. We're all fighting the political things. We've got this range of students. How do we work together? And that interdisciplinary work. And so we were thinking about, when we think about research, how that's got to be interdisciplinary. It cannot be siloed.
Great. Linda, thank you. So we might hand over to Simon now. Do you have questions for us?
Yes. Lots. That was, oh my goodness, my brain is fizzing and bubbling away. Oh, incredible. We have had a couple of people post some questions. If you pop in, open the chats, you'll see them there. One from Erica, and this is just regarding, I'm not sure whether our New Zealand colleagues are aware of, in Victoria for a while now, there has been an organisation called the Actor Wellbeing Collective, which was started by a group of people with some funding from the Victorian state government in Australia to set up a body who could provide wellbeing support and resources and training and workshops for people in the industry, in the creative arts industries. And it was going incredibly well. And I think you can predict where the end of this sentence is going. And now it was decided in various ways. I'm about to put up, if it actually pastes for me. Yes, it does. This is the official statement from the Arts Centre Melbourne. So Erica, in answer to your question, a mix of management changes, funding changes, and focus changes. And I think, yes, I've heard various things from various people, but generally it's been a real blow. They were very, very productive in getting government money, which they could then do everything from supply intimacy and wellness coaches for tours and films and various things. So I'll just post that if it works. Oh no, I'm over the limit of text. Okay, that's helpful. That's lovely. Okay, let's I'll work out a way of doing that. Okay. Also, Erica said, do you even know why that's called? Okay. Any other funding support available to the work you are undertaking through government bodies or independent bodies? So I suppose that's a question for all of you. Any funding support available that you're aware of, and whether internal to institutions or external bodies?
In terms of funding towards like wellbeing resourcing
through wellbeing
activities.
courses or wellbeing services, yeah.
So
well, I'm assuming, Erica, by the fact that our esteemed panelists aren't leaping forward, that they're all waiting for that funding and that news as well.
I could add one thing, Simon. Sorry,
yes, Mark.
Sorry, just one thing. I know there is now conversation beginning between Creative Australia, which for our New Zealand colleagues is our national arts body. It used to be known as the AUSCO, that's Australian Council for the Arts, and they have a new well-being focus as one of the the standards or the pillars of Creative Australia around question of sustaining, supporting, believing in well-being for all kinds of artists, not just performing artists, visual artists, and those involved in the production of those programs. That conversation has begun with ASPA here in Australia, which is the Australian Society for Performing Arts Healthcare. So given that Creative Australia is a government agency and is in conversation with ASPA, hopefully for Australia, that may mean something. I can't speak to New Zealand, but Hillary can. Yeah.
I just looked up the New Zealand version of Creative Australia, Creative New Zealand, and one of their guiding principles is to do with participation, access, excellence, innovation, professionalism, and advocacy. And I can certainly see that well-being for career artists certainly fits into those guiding principles, and that is one of the guiding principles only. I don't know how much this has been tested. If anybody has actually, I've not heard. That's actually not quite true. I've not heard of projects that have got a kind of performance-based or training-based outcome, but there have been a number of books written about actor wellbeing through the imprimatur of Playmarket New Zealand. Oh. And they are fantastic, written by artists, written by creative artists. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Simon, any other questions for us?
That's terrific. Thank you to ASPA for your comment about the Sydney Dance Pre-Professional Program, which is has been incredibly proactive in the dance space about encouraging well-being as part of the course, and also in terms of teacher and teacher support. Jeff has posted, "Are acting teachers encouraged to take 5 minutes to breathe, ground, and butterfly hug themselves to self-regulate before and after classes, or is there simply no time?"
Jennifer.
Yes. Jeff, how that would be so lovely. In my experience, there is no time. And anecdotally, you know, I was talking to somebody who teaches in an institution and was saying, you know, I figure things out on the stairs on the way up to class. You know, in some of my past roles, I have had so much pressure to finish this document or whatever it is that, you know, if I get to the loo on the way to class, that's a bonus. That's my experience. But how nice would it be? But the other point about that is the culture of that particular institution, but specifically department, and who is running the department and who is setting up protocols is so important, because that can make the difference. Somebody who sits there and says, "Hey guys, hey everybody, let's do this. Let's take a minute as a group." You know, it can happen, but it has to be. We have to be reminded, because we just have so much to do, I think.
Kylie?
I was going to say, along with that, especially being more casual based when you're coming in and out of venues as well. Rooms are available at certain points. There's a lot of squeeze on resources and spaces. So if I can get in early enough and my space is not being used, I try and set up in my space. But it's kind of like, as soon as you set up the doctor's surgery, in comes your first patient. So eventually people are coming in and they want to connect with you. So I usually use that time, if I can just do a quick setup, I usually use it to go and do the check-ins just to see how people are going. So yeah, I probably would like some more time to set up for me, but part of the setup for me is is knowing what's about to hit in the room. So that's useful. If I'm there with more than one class, the breaks in the middle between classes are very short. If I've got students talking to me about stuff, sometimes even getting a lunch break is a luxury. So yeah, time is poor, but I'm going to practice that butterfly hug. I think that's a nice way to do it.
Thanks, Kylie. Hilary, you're muted, Hilary.
Very little to add, except I've got a 15-minute walk from my office to the place where I teach, sometimes in the rain and sleet of Dunedin. So that doesn't kind of sometimes very conducive. But just apropos of the butterfly hug, I've seen, Glenda, students that you've taught that to in the actor class, using that technique in so many other contexts and classes and situations. So I'm going to find a little moment, perhaps in the loo, to do a butterfly hug before my class.
That sounds wonderful, Hilary. And I see Glenda applauding. Simon, any other questions from our participants?
We had a quick follow-up from Erica just about collaborative projects between tertiary institutions and industry bodies or producers. And I'm just aware of time, but if anyone has an awareness of any of those that are going on, given the increasing discussion that's going on amongst the students about well-being, are there projects that you're aware of or that are hopefully happening between institutions and industry bodies or industry producers?
Nothing. Kylie, maybe? Yes.
Are you talking about well-being connections for somebody who's a student to be working in the professional space? Is that what that question is about? Because we do have students going to work with theatre companies and different directors obviously for actual learning experience, but probably not.
The implication of the question, I think, is that it's more regarding both those and also well-being or skills connections, or perhaps that scope.
All right.
Thank you, Erica, for posting some theatre venues have well-being as one of their pillars. So perhaps synergies with venues for tertiary industry staff to build upon. Just bouncing it over to Mark. Oh, thank you, Hilary, for posting that link. That's fantastic.
I think that Erica's got a really interesting point there, because it's actually something that I teach in a final semester program called Designing My Creative Career, where we actually look at strategies where we proactively encourage people who have trained in the arts to recognize that they have an amazing skill set to take to organizations, institutions, different industries like business groups and all sorts of other hospitals perhaps, and all sorts of other places, bringing that creativity into that space, and perhaps also bringing the wisdom accumulated about dealing with risk, uncertainty, creating a safe space. There's building team skills, collaborative skills. There could be a whole shopping list of wonderful things that our students collectively learn that are needed out there in the community. And there could absolutely, and there's some really good books, I can't think of a title immediately to mind, that are encouraging us to be much more creative as artists, to look to our human colleagues in other professions and see what collaborations we could do, which could also involve money. That means we actually have employment of our actors, not just in acting, and I don't mean just acting, but not only in acting, but also bringing their skill sets in collaboration, listening, voice, well-being. Because that's something that I think is wonderful, that we actually have been actively, proactively building in to our actor training programs.
One question. Sorry, Alice, for skipping over I've scrolled too enthusiastically and I missed yours. Alice has posted, might there be scope within acting schools to bring a module of therapeutic theatre or self-revelatory theatre into courses? And Alice is a professional actor and a professional drama therapist. So the scope for bringing in specialized modules, has anyone got any thoughts on that particular?
Jennifer, yes.
I think for me, the word therapy or therapeutic always sets off a little alarm as a voice teacher in an acting school, because I'm not a trained therapist. So if we're talking about bringing in somebody externally, then I think that could be a possibility, certainly. I think, and also I think self-revelatory, I think that to me is quite different to therapeutic. And I would say that self-revelatory work is already potentially happening within a lot of the facilitated exercises. Therapeutic, I just always, I don't know. I have it had so trained into me that you know, acting school is not therapy, but I just read a paper called, it's not therapy, right? So I don't know if anyone has this sort of thing where if we open that, if we sort of introduce it, we call it that, are we pushing students into a road? I think that's different to self-discovery. I don't know. Am I having...
Hillary's got something to contribute there, I think.
Yes, that was always my what was told to me is, work with your acting teacher on your acting and your therapist on your therapy. But I think the question that Alice is asking is a bit different and quite akin to some of the things I think that you and I are doing, actually, Mahi, that we're doing, Glenda, because we talk about the idea of well-being, and we show them how their cognitive functioning works in order to facilitate well-being and so on. But if they want to talk to Glenda in a therapeutic way, they do it in a completely different context. Does that make sense?
Okay. It makes sense to me. So Simon, I'm conscious we're at the wrapping up time. So what I'll do, just before Simon, you kind of officially close the end of this meeting, first of all, and I'm sure you'll thank our guests, I'd like to point out to when our next Actor Wellbeing session will be as a webinar. I'm just going to bring the slide and share that with everyone. Just give me a moment. And I'll bring it up fully. Oops. There we go. So the next webinar will be about a month from now. It's the actor's process, well-being from rehearsal to performance. So this session we've looked at actor training, what's working, what needs to be worked on, how we're supporting our students and our actors. But next time we'll be looking actually at the process of acting in the rehearsal phases and the preparation, the training, and well, actually rehearsal after training into performance, and what's in place to support well-being of actors. So we'll have a guest panel for that one on Saturday, the 22nd of February, Australian Eastern Daylight Saving Time, 6 p.m. So, and ASPA will be promoting that to everyone through their Facebook page. And if you've joined today's session, you'll be notified of that next webinar. Over to you, Simon, for our final hurrah.
Thank you, everybody, so much for coming along to our fabulous panel. If you're comfortable, could you put your best contact email or website or Insta handle or LinkedIn or whichever for people just into the chat, please, just so that participants that have questions that bubble up at 3 o'clock tomorrow morning will be able to contact you immediately about those. That would be tremendous.
In a caring way.
In a very caring and sharing way. Thank you, Alice. Juicy discussions indeed. Thank you so much to Hilary. Thank you to Glenda. Thank you to Jennifer, and thank you to Kylie so much. The amount of wisdom here is phenomenal, and it's gloriously and generously shared. And so thank you so much for that. It'd be great to do another one of these in 6 months' time and see how the year's going for all of you, with all of the new changes and things that are happening in the academic sectors across both of our countries, to see how things are traveling. Perhaps we might think about that. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you to ASPA for hosting. Thank you for your assistance too, to the Equity Foundation. Thank you to Dr. Mark Seton as well. We would be delighted to see you again on the 22nd of February. Same bat time, same bat cliche. Please do join us, and we'll see you all again soon. Thank you very much, and farewell.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.